Good morning. The other driver who caused your accident, who caused your injuries right here in Maryland. Maybe they were drinking, maybe they were doing drugs, maybe they were distracted while driving. Today, we're going to find out what impact that has on your Maryland injury case. Good morning, everybody. Happy Monday. Happy St. Patrick's Day to those who celebrate. It is March 17th. This is your accident injury guy, Jobeth Bowers, coming to you from my Elkton office. Today, we're going to talk about a topic that comes up in way too many of the injury cases that we handle here in my Elkton office, and that is what happens when the other driver, the person who caused this accident, is in some way elevated in their cause of harm. Maybe they were drinking and driving. Maybe they were suspected of being intoxicated some other way. Maybe they were texting while driving. Something like that contributed to the other driver causing the accident that caused you injuries. What does it mean? Does it make any sort of change to the value of your case and how everything is handled? Well, the most simple question, the one that's probably going to surprise you a little bit, especially if you've moved here from Delaware or Pennsylvania. In Delaware and Pennsylvania, two different states with two totally different rules on how things like drugs and alcohol intoxication are utilized and factored when it comes to an injury claim and its value. I'm not going to talk about the details of the Delaware differences and the Pennsylvania differences because I'm not licensed to practice in either of those jurisdictions. If you are dealing with a situation in one of those jurisdictions where that's where the accident happened, contact my office. We can put you in touch with somebody who knows very, very well how to navigate either Delaware or Pennsylvania. Over the decade plus that we have been here in Elkton, we have built up some very solid relationships with some fantastic practitioners in Delaware and in Pennsylvania that can guide you through that process. But what we're talking about is your accident, your injury claim right here in Maryland, and what impact facts or suspicions that the other driver was drunk, put on drugs, or distracted. Maybe they were on their phone texting, doing something with social media. Maybe they were watching this podcast and boom. Well, no, maybe they weren't watching this podcast, but hopefully not. You should be watching this from someplace safe. But what happens if that is the case? If somebody is suspected of one of these things, the surprising answer, and I can tell you that it surprises almost everybody that is in my office, and we're talking about how this accident happened and the causation, it has very, very little impact, at least on the injury portion of the claim. You're not getting paid extra money because somebody was under the influence or otherwise distracted. Some bits of this week's episode we've talked about and touched on in previous episodes. So some of this will be repeat if you are up to date and have watched every single episode and have absorbed all of this. There are three real factors that go into how we resolve and are able to get compensation for our clients. Now, there are many, many moving parts to these claims, but three key things that we are looking for in assessing what will actually be able to get our client compensated. Number one is liability. Is the other person at fault 100% for the accident that we're talking about? And I say 100%, that is specific to Maryland and 4 or 5 other jurisdictions in the US. Some states, most states, have some sort of how much at fault were you? If you weren't 100% at fault, maybe you were 10% at fault for an accident. A lot of states, the rule is such that you can only collect 90% of what a jury would award you. That is not the case in Maryland. In Maryland, if you are 0.001% found to be contributing to an accident, you get zero. So that is the thing that I tell people all the time. Where the intoxication, where the drunkenness, whatever it may be, comes into play is purely in determining, is the other driver at fault? Would this accident have even happened if it were not for the entire actions of that other driver? It is like a light switch. It is either on or it is off. There is no dimmer switch. It is on or off here in Maryland. So why the other driver was at fault only matters so much as to determine that the other driver was in fact at fault. There are not escalators in Maryland for any of those factors that we've discussed, or anything else that you might think of that might make you feel like the accident was worse because that person was in a certain condition. It doesn't matter for the purposes of assessing value. In Maryland, it only goes toward the liability element. Second factor, which we've talked about, but isn't so much the focus here today, is the damages. How hurt was somebody? How hurt you were. This is where the mindset of the law here in Maryland comes into play. How hurt you were is an individual personal question. Where were you before the accident happened? Where were you after the accident happened? And what did it take? What did you miss out on? What opportunity costs? What time was taken? What actual pain you experienced to get from right after the accident to a condition that is as close to before the accident as is possible. When we deal with some of the larger cases with surgeries, broken bones, scarring, other sort of permanent disfigurements, some of our clients will never get back to where they were pre-accident, but they'll get close and we can assess the permanency. There are doctors that do that, but there isn't a factor in there that is designed to go after or escalate the damages because of the condition of the other driver. The value of these cases is about you and the impact to you. So we talked about physical injuries numerous times in many of these episodes. Obviously, as an injury attorney, it's going to be a common theme that will still continue for future episodes. So what did it do to you? What medical care did it take for you to get back to where you were pre-accident? Emergency room, ambulance, primary care doctor, physical therapy, orthopedic surgeon. Was there a surgery? All of these things are part of that question and determining the answer to that question. What did you miss out on? What problems did you have? What enjoyable things? How did this impact your life? What are the things that you would do routinely that you couldn't do temporarily or in some cases permanently as a result of this accident? Many of my clients are motorcycle riders, hunters, fishermen and women, people that can't necessarily do those things while they're injured from these accidents. Very difficult to quantify. A hospital bill is going to be X $1,000. That's a number. We can put that right there and say, here, award this and this and this and this. But when it comes to the way that it impacts your life, it's a different metric. What is the value of a day in someone's life? That's a super important question. The third element that also reflects on a common theme of this podcast is insurance coverage. How much insurance is there to actually pay for these injuries? Because ultimately, insurance companies cut the checks at the end of the day. If you're ever on a jury and you're thinking about that person sitting by the defense attorney, the person who caused the accident, and you're thinking, well, they don't seem like such a bad person, I don't want to punish them. Don't worry, you're not. They are the named defendant, but it's an insurance company 99.999% of the time that is ultimately going to cut the check and pay the claim. the likelihood that that attorney that's sitting there defending the case is hired by an insurance company to defend their wallet, pretty high, almost 100%. But the important thing is circling back to this topic of how about those other factors that make somebody seem like a bad guy or a bad gal, the distracted driving, the drunkenness, being on drugs, whatever it is, it has no impact. You don't get extra money. In fact, a lot of times in the process of a trial, defense counsel is going to work with and try to make it so that any evidence of that person's condition isn't going to be allowed to be talked about. And many, many times they're going to win that argument and not be able to tell the jury that the defendant was in one of those conditions. Because again, it only speaks to whether or not they were at fault. At least the way that the law is in Maryland, you're not getting extra for that. So I bring that up. It's a very surprising and to some people a disappointing answer to the question, but it's important to know that it isn't particularly a factor, at least not here in Maryland. So that's all we have for you today. I get that question a lot. Every time it is suspected, I've got clients asking about that and how it impacts case value. So I thought it was important to bring it up here. You may have other questions. info@bowerslawmd.com. Send them in. Make sure that we know that you want it to be discussed on the podcast and that you're not just trying to hire us for representation. And as always, if it's not accident or injury related, if it's not something that I have a great deal of understanding or experience with because I stay in my lane and I do these accident and injury cases, that's why we get the results that we get. We are singular focused here at Bowers Law. We're going to bring somebody in. I'm going to be sitting side by side with somebody talking about that topic. So make sure when you put it in there that we know that you want me to talk about it here on the podcast, and I absolutely will. So until next time, next Monday, we'll see you. Be safe out there. Be well. Have a great week.